The sky was bright blue on that special May morning in London. It was May 6, 2023, a day everyone would remember. Today was King Charles's big day, his coronation. People from all over the world were watching, but many eyes were on Prince William, Kate, and their 3 children. The day started early at Kensington Palace. The royal family woke up before the sun rose. There was so much to do before they went to Westminster Abbey. The air in the palace buzzed with excitement, and a bit of worry too. Prince William stood in front of his mirror, fixing his red military uniform. The gold buttons shined in the morning light. He wore many medals on his chest that showed his service to the country. His hand shook a little as he put on his special blue sash. This day meant a lot to him. His father would become king, and William would move one step closer to his own future as king someday. In another room, Kate was getting ready. She chose a beautiful white outfit made by her favorite designer, Alexander McQueen. The dress had small flowers sewn with silver thread. On her head, she would wear a headpiece with diamonds that sparkled like stars. Kate looked at herself in the mirror and took a deep breath. She knew the whole world would be watching her family today. The children were being helped by their nannies. 10-year-old Prince George was very serious about his job today. He would be a page of honor for his grandfather during the ceremony. This was a big job for a young boy. He practiced his walk and how to hold a heavy royal robe. He wanted to do everything just right. Princess Charlotte, who was 8, sat still while a hairdresser fixed her long hair. She would wear a small silver tiara that matched her mother's headpiece. Charlotte was excited to wear such a grown-up item. She kept asking if she looked like a real princess. 5-year-old Prince Louis was the hardest to get ready. He didn't want to wear his fancy clothes. He ran around his room, making his nannies chase him. "I want to wear my superhero shirt," he shouted with a laugh. William had to come in and talk to his youngest son. "Louis," William said, kneeling down to look in his son's eyes. "Today is very special for Grandpa. The whole country is watching. Can you be a big boy and wear these nice clothes? You can be my special helper today." Louis thought about it for a moment. Then he nodded. "Will there be cake after?" he asked. William laughed and promised there would be cake. At last, the whole family gathered in the main room. They all looked perfect in their royal outfits. William looked at Kate and the children with pride in his eyes. They had practiced for weeks for this day. The children knew when to walk, when to sit, and when to stand. Even little Louis had learned what to do, though no one was sure if he would remember when the time came. "Are we all ready?" William asked, looking at his family. Kate straightened George's collar one last time. Charlotte checked her dress for any wrinkles. Louis just jumped up and down with excitement. "As ready as we'll ever be," Kate said with a small smile. Outside, they could hear the horses and carriages getting ready. The sound of police motorcycles filled the air. It was time to leave for Westminster Abbey, where centuries of royal history waited for them. The family walked toward the palace doors, ready to step into the pages of history. A line of shiny black cars waited outside Kensington Palace. The royal family walked out into the bright morning sun. Workers bowed their heads as the family passed. Prince William nodded at them with a smile. "Look at the big cars," Prince Louis said. His eyes were wide with wonder. He pointed at the royal crest on the car doors. The golden lion and unicorn seemed to shine in the sunlight. "Yes, Louis, these special cars will take us to the Abbey," Kate said. She held his small hand tightly. She wore white gloves that matched her dress. The family got into the main car. The seats were soft red leather. Prince George sat up very straight. He knew cameras would be taking pictures through the windows. Princess Charlotte sat beside him, smoothing her white dress carefully. "Remember what we practiced," William said to the children. His voice was calm but serious. "Today is about Grandpa, but people will be watching us too." "I remember everything," Charlotte said proudly. She had been practicing her royal way for weeks. The cars started to move. Police motorcycles went in front and behind them. The family's car had small flags on the front that flapped in the wind. As they drove through London, the streets were not empty. Thousands of people stood behind barriers. They waved flags and cheered when they saw the royal cars. Some people had camped out all night to get a good spot. "So many people came to see us," George said. He looked out the window with surprise. "They came to be part of history," William explained, "just like when great-grandma Elizabeth became queen." The car drove past tall buildings and famous London sights. They passed Buckingham Palace, where King Charles was getting ready. They saw the Horse Guards parade, where soldiers in red coats and tall black hats stood at attention. Louis pressed his face against the window. "Look at the soldiers," he said. He waved at them, but they didn't wave back. They stood very still, like statues. The closer they got to Westminster Abbey, the bigger the crowds became. People held up phones to take pictures. News cameras followed the royal cars. Helicopters flew overhead to film everything from the sky. Kate looked a bit nervous. "So many cameras," she said quietly. William took her hand. "You look beautiful," he told her. "The children look perfect too. We've done this many times." But they had never done something this big with all three children. Kate worried most about Louis. Would he sit still during the long ceremony? Would he get bored? Would he say something funny at the wrong time? As if reading her mind, William smiled. "Louis will be Louis," he said. "People love him for it." The car turned onto the road leading to Westminster Abbey. The ancient church looked even bigger and more impressive up close. Its tall towers seemed to touch the sky. The building was over 700 years old and had seen many royal events. "Wow," whispered Charlotte. Even she was impressed by the grand building. Police officers opened a path through the crowd. The car stopped at the Abbey entrance. This was the moment people had been waiting to see. Cameras clicked rapidly, taking hundreds of pictures. A royal helper opened the car door. Prince William stepped out first. He buttoned his jacket and stood tall. Then he turned to help Kate out of the car. When Kate stepped out, the crowd cheered loudly. Her white dress sparkled in the sun. She smiled and gave a small wave. Then the children came out one by one. George first, looking serious and grown-up. Charlotte next, giving a perfect princess wave. Finally, Louis jumped out, his eyes big with excitement. The Cambridge family stood together for a moment. 5 royals in a row. The perfect picture of a future king and queen with their 3 children. The crowd's cheers grew even louder. It was time to walk into Westminster Abbey, where centuries of history waited for them inside. The royal family stood at the entrance of Westminster Abbey. The huge wooden doors were open wide. Inside, they could see colorful lights coming through the stained glass windows. The abbey was full of flowers, white roses, lily of the valley, and blue delphiniums. The sweet smell filled the air. A church official in a long black robe bowed to the family. "Your Royal Highnesses," he said, "please follow me." William nodded. He took Louis's hand firmly. Kate held Charlotte's hand, while George walked on his own. They entered the abbey together. The stone floor was cold under their feet. Their footsteps made soft echoes in the high ceiling. Inside, over 2,000 people were already seated. Kings and queens from other countries sat in the front rows. Famous actors, singers, and world leaders filled other seats. When the crowd saw William and his family, they all stood up to show respect. Louis's mouth opened wide. "So many people," he whispered loudly. Some people nearby smiled at his cute comment. "Shh," William said gently. "Remember to use your quiet voice." The family walked down the long aisle. Everyone watched them. Kate kept her head high and her back straight. She looked calm, but her heart beat fast. Charlotte copied her mother's perfect posture. The little princess didn't look nervous at all, even with thousands of eyes on her. They reached their special seats in the front row. The seats had red velvet cushions with gold trim. Before they sat down, George had to leave his family. As page of honor, he would join King Charles's procession. "Good luck," William said quietly to his son. He fixed George's white collar one last time. "I won't let you down, Father," George said. His voice was serious. Then he walked to the back of the church where the other pages waited. William, Kate, Charlotte, and Louis sat in their seats. Louis swung his legs because they didn't reach the floor. Charlotte sat perfectly still with her hands folded in her lap. Kate gave her a proud smile. From their seats, they could see everything. The ancient stone coronation chair waited in the center. Soon, King Charles would sit there to receive his crown. Above them, gold decorations covered the ceiling. Huge flags hung from the walls. Important people kept coming in. Everyone was dressed in their best clothes. Ladies wore fancy hats in all colors. Men wore military uniforms with shiny medals or black mourning suits. The noise of quiet talking filled the big church. Louis looked around with big eyes. He had never seen anything like this before. "Mummy," he whispered to Kate, "is this like a fairy tale?" Kate smiled and whispered back, "Yes, a bit like that. But it's real history happening today." The church bells started to ring. The sound was deep and loud. This meant King Charles was getting close. William sat up even straighter. Soon his father would walk in, and the ceremony would begin. Music started to play. The choir began to sing in beautiful voices that filled every corner of the abbey. The sound gave Kate goosebumps on her arms. Even Louis stopped fidgeting to listen. "It's starting," William whispered to his family. Charlotte looked excited. "Will we see George soon?" she asked. "Yes," Kate answered. "He'll be carrying Grandpa's robe. Look for him behind the king." The abbey grew quiet. Everyone stood up again. The huge doors at the back opened wide. Sunlight streamed in, creating a bright path down the center aisle. Guards in red uniforms marched in first. Then came men carrying golden sticks and special symbols of the king's power. The Archbishop of Canterbury walked in wearing white and gold robes. William put his hand on Louis's shoulder to keep him still. Kate took a deep breath. Charlotte stood tall like a true princess. They were ready to watch George do his special job and to see King Charles be crowned in this ancient ceremony. The music grew louder. The sweet sound of trumpets filled the abbey. Everyone looked toward the back doors. And there he was, King Charles, walking slowly down the aisle. He wore a heavy red robe with white fur trim. The robe was so long it trailed behind him on the floor. And there, right behind him, was Prince George. The young prince held part of the king's long robe. He walked carefully, making sure not to step on it. His face was serious. He knew how important his job was today. "Look at George," Charlotte whispered. Her eyes were wide with pride for her big brother. Louis pointed with excitement. "George is helping Grandpa," he said a bit too loudly. Some people turned to look at the little prince with smiles on their faces. Kate gently put her finger to her lips to remind Louis to be quiet, but she was smiling too. She felt proud seeing George doing such an important job. William watched his father and his son walk together. His eyes were a bit wet. This moment connected 3 generations: Charles, the new king, William, the future king, and George, who would be king someday too. It was like seeing time itself walk down the aisle. The king reached the front of the abbey. George carefully placed the robe just right, then went to stand with the other pages. He glanced quickly at his family and gave them a tiny smile. Then the ceremony truly began. The Archbishop spoke words that had been said at coronations for hundreds of years. The choir sang songs that were very old. The words were hard to understand because they used old-fashioned language. Louis started to get bored. He swung his legs and looked around at the pretty windows. Kate took a small book from her purse. It had pictures of the ceremony to help the children understand what was happening. She showed it to Louis, pointing to the pictures and whispering explanations. Charlotte sat very still, watching everything with great interest. She seemed to understand how special this day was. When the crown was brought out on a red pillow, she gasped softly. The crown looked heavy. It was made of gold and covered with jewels that sparkled in the light. Diamonds, rubies, and sapphires decorated it. This was Street Edward's crown, only used for coronations. "Is that real gold?" Louis asked. "Yes," William whispered. "And those are real jewels. That crown is over 300 years old." Louis's eyes got big. "That's older than you, Papa." William had to cover his mouth to stop from laughing out loud. Kate bit her lip to hide her smile. Even Charlotte had to work hard not to giggle. The Archbishop lifted the heavy crown high for everyone to see. Then, very carefully, he placed it on King Charles's head. At that exact moment, trumpets played loudly. Everyone in the abbey stood up. "Long live the king," they all said together. The sound was so loud it seemed to shake the walls. William, Kate, and their children stood tall. They said the words too. "Long live the king." Louis shouted his words with great enthusiasm, making people nearby smile again. The crown looked very heavy on King Charles's head, but he sat straight and tall. He was now officially the King of the United Kingdom. William felt a mix of feelings. He was happy for his father, but he also knew that someday he would sit in that same chair. And then, many years later, little George would too. Kate seemed to know what he was thinking. She reached over and squeezed his hand. Her touch said what words couldn't, that she would be by his side when his time came, just as she was today. The most important part of the ceremony was over, but there was still much more to come. The service would last for 2 more hours. Kate wondered if Louis would be able to sit still that long. As if on cue, the little prince tugged at her sleeve. "Mummy," he whispered, "is it time for cake yet?" The ceremony continued with more special parts. King Charles sat on the throne wearing his heavy crown. He held a golden scepter in one hand and a special orb in the other. These were symbols of his power and responsibility. Kate checked on Louis, who was starting to fidget more. She took a small toy soldier from her purse and slipped it into his hand. Louis smiled and played with it quietly. Kate had planned ahead, knowing the long ceremony would be hard for a 5-year-old boy. Charlotte watched everything with great interest. She leaned close to Kate. "Will you wear a crown someday too, Mummy?" she whispered. Kate nodded. "Yes, but not the same one. Queens have different crowns." Charlotte thought about this. "When I grow up, can I wear a crown?" "Maybe for special times," Kate whispered back. "But being royal isn't just about crowns. It's about helping people and doing important work." William listened to their quiet talk. He was proud of how Kate explained things to their daughter. Charlotte needed to understand both the fancy parts and the serious parts of royal life. George stood perfectly still with the other pages. He didn't fidget or look around. William could see that his son was taking his job very seriously. George had the same strong sense of duty that William had learned from his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth. The Archbishop said prayers over the king. Then other important people came forward to honor him. Some knelt before him. Others gave him special gifts. The ceremony had many parts that had been done the same way for hundreds of years. Louis tugged on William's sleeve. "Papa," he whispered, "why does Grandpa have to sit so long?" William smiled. "Being king means sitting through long meetings," he whispered back. "This is good practice for him." The music changed again. The choir began to sing a beautiful song. The sound filled every corner of the old church. Even Louis stopped wiggling to listen. The voices seemed to float up to the high ceiling. Suddenly, a beam of sunlight came through a stained glass window. It made colorful patterns on the stone floor. Louis pointed at the rainbow colors with wide eyes. Kate smiled at his wonder. Even in this formal ceremony, Louis found something magical to enjoy. The next part of the ceremony was when special people pledged to serve the king. Prince William would have an important role now. He stood up and walked to the front. He knelt before his father, the king. Charlotte and Louis watched with big eyes as their father knelt. They had never seen him bow to anyone before. Kate sat very straight, watching her husband with pride. William said special words that had been said by royal sons for many centuries. He promised to be loyal to the king. But these weren't just official words. This was a son promising to support his father. When William said, "I will be your liege man of life and limb," his voice was strong and clear. Then William did something that wasn't in the official plan. He leaned forward and kissed his father on the cheek. It was a son's kiss to his father, a moment of family love in the middle of the royal ceremony. King Charles looked surprised. Then his eyes softened. Many people in the crowd felt tears in their eyes. They saw not just a king and his heir, but a father and son. Kate felt proud of William for showing that royal duty and family love could exist together. William returned to his seat. Charlotte looked at him with shining eyes. "You did a good job, Papa," she whispered. Louis nodded in agreement. "But you had to kneel on the hard floor," he added with concern. William smiled at his children. "Sometimes we do uncomfortable things for the people we love," he said softly. George was now watching from his place with the other pages. His eyes were thoughtful. Someday, William would kneel before him when George became king. The circle of history would continue. The ceremony moved to a quieter part. The king was given holy oil. The archbishop put small drops of this special oil on the king's hands, chest, and head. This oil was a symbol of blessing. The church became very quiet. Everyone watched in silence. Louis had been good for a long time, but now he was getting restless. He started to swing his legs again. Kate gave him a small smile but put her hand gently on his knee to stop the swinging. "How much longer?" Louis whispered to his mother. "Not too much longer," Kate whispered back. "You're doing very well." Charlotte sat like a perfect little royal. Her back was straight, and her hands were folded in her lap. She watched everything with bright, interested eyes. Several times, important people looked at her and smiled. They could see she was taking everything in and learning. The king now wore a different crown. It was smaller than the first one, but still very beautiful. This was the imperial state crown that he would wear at the end of the ceremony, and when he left the abbey. Music filled the church again. The choir sang the song that was written just for this special day. The music made the old stones of Westminster Abbey seem to come alive. William looked around at the abbey. Kings and queens had been crowned here for over 900 years. His father was now part of that long line of history, and someday he would be too. And then George after him. The thought made William sit up even straighter. Kate noticed William's serious face. She knew he was thinking about the future. She reached over and touched his hand lightly. Her touch seemed to bring him back to the present moment. The most solemn parts of the ceremony were now over. The king stood up from the throne. He walked to a different part of the abbey where he would greet some important people. George's part as page was done for now. He walked carefully back to join his family. William moved over so George could sit between him and Kate. "You did perfectly," William told his son quietly. George smiled, looking relieved. "The robe was heavier than I thought it would be," he whispered. "You didn't show it at all," Kate said. She fixed his collar, which had become slightly crooked. Louis was excited to have his big brother back. "George, did you see me being good?" he asked, a bit too loudly. "Sha," Charlotte reminded him. "But yes, you were quite good, Louis." Louis beamed at this praise from his siblings. He sat up straighter, trying to copy how George and Charlotte were sitting. The ceremony continued with more prayers and music. Then it was time for a special moment that the children had been looking forward to. The king would receive honors from all the royal children and grandchildren. William stood up. "It's time," he said to his children. "Remember what we practiced." George, Charlotte, and Louis stood up too. They checked their clothes quickly. Then they followed their father to where the king sat on his throne. Other royal children and grandchildren joined them. They made a half circle around the king. Everyone in the abbey watched with interest. The children would each bow or curtsy to the new king. George went first. He gave a perfect bow, bending from the waist with one arm across his chest. His face was serious and proper. Charlotte went next. She did a beautiful curtsy, holding out the sides of her white dress. She looked just like a miniature version of her mother. Then it was Louis's turn. Everyone held their breath. Would the youngest prince remember what to do? Louis stepped forward. He looked at his grandfather with big eyes. King Charles gave him a small, encouraging smile. Then Louis did a bow. It wasn't as perfect as George's, but it was good for a 5-year-old. People around the abbey smiled at the little prince's effort. The king reached out and touched Louis's cheek gently. It was a grandfather's touch, full of love. For that brief moment, they weren't just king and prince. They were grandpa and grandson. After the special moment with the king, William and the children returned to their seats. Kate looked at them with pride. All 3 children had done so well. Even Louis, the youngest, had remembered his vow. "You were all perfect," she whispered as they sat down. The ceremony was moving toward its end. The king stood up and moved to another part of the abbey. He would now be seen by all the people there. He walked slowly under his heavy robes and crown. The gold and jewels of the crown caught the light from the windows. Louis watched with wide eyes. "The crown is so sparkly," he said to Kate. "Yes, it has many jewels," Kate explained quietly. "Some of them are hundreds of years old." A new part of the ceremony began. People came forward to give gifts to the king. These were not birthday presents, but special symbolic gifts. Each one meant something important about being king. Charlotte was interested in these gifts. She watched carefully as each one was presented. When someone gave the king the beautiful sword with jewels on its handle, Charlotte whispered to Kate, "What is that for?" "It shows that the king will protect the country," Kate explained. The ceremony had been going on for almost 2 hours now. Louis was trying hard to sit still, but it was difficult for him. He started to fidget again. William noticed and put his arm around his youngest son. "Not much longer now," he promised quietly. The music changed again. The choir began to sing a song that everyone knew. It was "God Save the King." For many years, they had sung "God Save the Queen" for Louis's great-grandmother. This was the first time many people had sung this version. William, Kate, and the children stood up with everyone else. They sang the words clearly. Even Louis knew some of the words and sang along in his small voice. As the song filled the huge church, William felt a strong mix of feelings. He thought about his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, who had worn the crown for 70 years. He thought about his father, now King Charles, taking on this huge job at age 74. And he thought about himself and George, who would follow this path someday. The song ended. The king prepared to leave the abbey. George would need to help with the robe again. He stood up and went back to his place as page of honor. "Good luck," Charlotte whispered to him as he left. George nodded seriously and walked to where the other pages waited. Once again, he would help carry the king's heavy robe as they walked out of the abbey. The king stood tall, ready to leave. The crown still sat on his head. He would wear it all the way back to Buckingham Palace. The royal helpers arranged his robes. The pages, including Prince George, took their positions behind him. Music started again. Trumpets played a happy, triumphant song. The doors of Westminster Abbey opened wide. Bright sunlight streamed in, making a golden path down the aisle. The king began to walk down the aisle toward the doors. George walked carefully behind him, holding part of the long robe. The little prince looked focused on doing his job perfectly. William, Kate, Charlotte, and Louis would follow the king out of the abbey. They stood up and prepared to walk down the aisle after George and the king had passed. "Remember to walk slowly," Kate reminded Louis. "And wave to the people outside," William added. Charlotte smoothed her dress one last time. She was ready to be seen by the crowds waiting outside. Louis was excited now. The long sitting part was over. "Will we see the big golden coach?" he asked. "Yes," William said. "The king will ride in it back to the palace." The family watched as the king passed by them. George looked back quickly and gave them a small smile. Then the Wales family prepared to follow, ready to be part of the big parade back to Buckingham Palace. Outside, they could hear the crowds cheering loudly as the king appeared at the abbey doors. The sound was like thunder. Bells began to ring all over London. The coronation was almost complete. The Wales family stepped out of Westminster Abbey into the bright sunshine. The noise hit them right away. Thousands of people were cheering and clapping. Many people waved small British flags. Camera flashes went off like lightning all around them. Louis blinked in the sunlight. He had been inside the dark abbey for hours. Kate held his hand tightly so he wouldn't get lost in all the excitement. "Wave to the people," William reminded his family quietly. They all began to wave. Charlotte gave her perfect princess wave, moving her hand gently from side to side. She had practiced this many times. Louis waved with more energy, moving his whole arm up and down. The crowd loved it and cheered even louder. Outside, they could see the golden state coach waiting for the king. It was huge and covered in gold. 8 beautiful white horses would pull it through the streets of London. The coach was very old. It had been used for every coronation since 1831. "Look at the big golden coach," Louis said excitedly. He pointed at it with his free hand. "Isn't it magnificent?" Kate said. She was glad Louis could finally move and talk more freely after sitting quietly for so long. George was still with the king, helping with his robes. They watched as the king carefully climbed into the golden coach. The crown still sat on his head. It must have felt very heavy by now. George and the other pages stepped back once the king was safely in the coach. Their job was done. George looked relieved but proud as he walked back to join his family. "You did it perfectly," William told his son, putting his hand on George's shoulder. "The robe was even heavier when we were walking," George said, "but I didn't drop it." "We saw you," Charlotte said. "You looked very royal." The family now had to get into their own car for the parade back to Buckingham Palace. The parade would go through the center of London so as many people as possible could see the new king. As they walked to their car, many cameras followed them. News reporters spoke into microphones, describing what the family was wearing and how the children had behaved. The whole world was watching this historic day. "Princess Charlotte's dress is lovely white satin," one reporter said. "And look at little Prince Louis waving to the crowds." Louis heard his name and waved even more enthusiastically. The people nearby laughed and waved back at him. Their car was not as fancy as the golden coach, but it was still very special. It was a deep black color with the royal coat of arms on the doors. Inside, the seats were soft red leather. They climbed in, glad to have a moment of quiet away from the noise and cameras. Louis immediately pressed his face against the window to watch everything. "Can we roll down the windows?" he asked. "I want to wave some more." William smiled. "Yes, but just a little bit." The windows came down partway. Now the children could hear the cheers and music better. The sound of bands playing filled the air. The parade began to move. First came police officers on motorcycles. Then soldiers on horseback wearing bright red coats and tall black fur hats. Their buttons and swords shined in the sun. The golden coach with the king went next. It moved slowly because it was so old and heavy. The large wheels turned with a creaking sound. The 8 white horses stepped carefully, their white feathers bouncing on their heads. Then came the car with William, Kate, and their children. As they drove through the streets of London, more and more people lined the roads. Some people threw flowers. Others took pictures with their phones. Many called out, "God save the king," as the golden coach passed by. Inside their car, the Wales family waved to the crowds. Even George, who was usually more serious, seemed to enjoy the excitement now that his official duties were done. "Everyone looks so happy," Charlotte said, looking at all the smiling faces. "It's a big day for our country," William explained. People will remember this day for their whole lives. The parade would take them all the way to Buckingham Palace. There, they would stand on the famous balcony with the king. It would be the perfect ending to this historic day. The parade made its way through the famous streets of London. The car carrying the Wales family followed behind the golden coach with the king. People lined every street, cheering and taking pictures. Some had camped out all night to get a good spot. So many people, Lewis said, his face still pressed against the window. They're all waving at us. Wave back, Kate encouraged. This is a special day for them too. The family waved at the crowds as their car moved slowly through the city. Even though they were tired from the long ceremony, they kept smiling and waving. This was their job as royals, to connect with the people. William pointed out famous London sights to the children as they passed. "Look, there's Trafalgar Square," he said. "And now we're on the Mall." The Mall was the wide road that led straight to Buckingham Palace. It was lined with tall trees and decorated with hundreds of flags. The flags flapped in the breeze, making a gentle sound like birds' wings. At last, they could see Buckingham Palace ahead. The huge building looked even more grand today. The royal standard flag flew above it, showing that the king was now officially crowned. "We're almost there," Charlotte said. She sat up straighter, ready to be seen by the crowds waiting at the palace. Their car drove through the tall iron gates of Buckingham Palace. The gates closed behind them, keeping the public outside. Inside the palace grounds, it was quieter. Royal workers in special uniforms stood at attention as the car passed. The car stopped at the palace entrance. Helpers opened the doors for the family. They stepped out, glad to stretch their legs after the long day. "Is it balcony time now?" Louis asked excitedly. He had been looking forward to standing on the famous balcony. "Not quite yet," William said. "First, we need to get ready for the official photos." Inside the palace, everything was busy. Workers rushed around, making sure everything was perfect. The family was taken to a special room where they could rest for a few minutes. Kate helped Charlotte fix her hair. William straightened George's collar again. Louis was given a small snack to keep him happy. "You've all done so well today," William told his children. "Grandpa will be very proud." Soon, it was time for the official photographs. The family walked to a grand room with red walls and gold decorations. A photographer waited for them. The king was already there, still wearing his crown and robes. "Grandpa," Louis called out happily, forgetting the formal rules for a moment. The king smiled at his grandchildren. "Hello, my dears," he said. "You were all wonderful today." They took many photographs, some with just the king and William, some with the whole family. The photographer asked them to stand in different positions, making sure to get the perfect shots for history. After the photos, it was finally time for the balcony appearance. This was the moment the public had been waiting for. The royal family would stand on the balcony so everyone could see them. They walked through the palace to the balcony doors. They could hear the crowd outside chanting, "We want the king. We want the king." The doors opened. The king went first, stepping onto the balcony. The crowd roared with excitement when they saw him. William, Kate, and the children followed. They stood beside the king, waving to the huge crowd below. Louis's eyes grew wide at the sight of so many people. Thousands and thousands of faces looked up at them. The whole mall was filled with people as far as they could see. "Wow," he whispered. Then he gave his biggest wave yet, making the crowd cheer even louder. Military planes flew overhead, leaving trails of red, white, and blue smoke, the colors of the British flag. The sound was very loud. Louis covered his ears, but kept smiling and waving with his elbows. They stood on the balcony for several minutes, waving to the people below. This was the perfect ending to the historic day. The sun was starting to set, casting a golden light over London. The new king and his family stood together, connecting the past to the future. As they finally turned to go back inside, Louis had one last question. "Now is it time for cake?" he asked hopefully. William, Kate, and even the king laughed. "Yes, Louis," the king said. "I think we've all earned some cake today."